Happy Thursday. I don't know about the rest of you, but I woke up this morning kind of really excited and also really tired. It's been a long time since we've done conferences of 4 and 5 days. But it's really exciting to see everyone here. It's been wonderful to see the hallways and the rooms this week just kind of alive with conversations. On Monday, our team had a conversation about the Zen part of a conference. You plan and you anticipate and you change and you plan, and then you let it go because it's not ours anymore. Hundreds of other people come, right? You are members, your partners, the hotel staff, seen and unseen. We all come together to co-create an experience, which is exactly what we've done. And so first I want to say thank you for co-creating a few wonderful days of fellowship and learning, both literally and figuratively. My name is Olka Joshi-Hansen. I'm Chief Program Officer at Grantmakers for Education, and this conference has been in my mind and part of how I spent my days and nights for the last year. So literally and figuratively, we've co-created. If you haven't done it already, outside the doors is a huge mural mosaic project. The mural was designed by young people around the theme of this year's conference. And over the last couple of days, hundreds of you came and put together 10,000 tiles to make the mosaic, so please do check that out. There were typewriter rodeo poets that brought some of us to tears with poems that they co-constructed with us. Dozens of you came and stopped by the Ed Funders Live podcast studio that we had to share your thoughts about meaningful learning in your own lives and what that means for how we think about education. And then there's the learning that we've created together during learning sessions. So I've been talking to a lot of people who've reflected that this room and the hallways of this year's conference feel like they better reflect the diversity of our students, the nation, and our communities. And I've appreciated the really powerful, vulnerable conversations that folks have been willing to engage in about racial justice, about privilege, about power, and how all of these intersect with educational philanthropy. So we began on Monday with 2 pre-conference sessions. One was on the purpose of education and directions for educational philanthropy. The other was our fellowship for equity, empowerment, and storytelling. And we had amazing fellows that opened Tuesday morning sharing their authentic and vulnerable pieces with us. And I think that session and the conversation that we had there set the tone for the next couple of days and the conversations that have followed. So on Tuesday, Trabian Shorters reminded us how important it is for us to begin our work pushing back on a scarcity mindset that dominates our culture, right? This tendency that we all have to begin with the deficits of community, the deficits of children and youth. And he invited us to begin by recognizing everyone has aspirations for themselves and their children, and they have capacities that they bring to the table, and so we need to frame conversations about solutions around those assets. And then we heard from young leaders and educators here in the Austin region who are doing really powerful work in the face of conflict and the politicizing of education and learning. And they articulated the challenges really powerfully, but I walked away inspired because it's obvious that they carry a lot of hope and purpose into the work that they do. And then yesterday's lunch plenary zoomed us out a bit with Brian Stryker, providing a bit more context for us to consider in this moment in America. There's a lot of uncertainty about leadership, political leadership, educational leadership at the local and state levels. There are real challenges around toxic conflict, or as Amanda Ripley calls it, high conflict. And I've been thinking about her observation yesterday that we too often frame conversations in artificial binaries that ignore the complexities of being human, of being in true community, of what it means to craft solutions. I've been reflecting about how I've done that in my own work and life and how we can get better, how I can get better at holding space, right, in different ways for diverse perspectives as we work to create an equitable and just system. And that brings us to today and our final plenary that's going to focus us in on the theme of this year's conference, which is igniting hope, as we try and align around a shared vision of what education can be and enable for young people in America. So it's a real honor and privilege today to kick off with our first plenary conversation with 3 amazing leaders in our field. Bob Hughes is Director of K-12 Education at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Dr. Pamela Cantor is founder and senior science advisor at Turnaround for Children and a thought leader on human potential, the science of learning and development, and educational equity. And then Jim Shelton, Chief Investment and Impact Officer at Blue Meridian Partners. So please join me in welcoming them. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm very excited to be here with you all today. And I want to kick us off by having you each introduce yourself. And the prompt I'll offer is, we know your titles, but what do we all need to know about the unique perspective that you bring as a person? Not that your title isn't part of who you are, but what's the perspective you're going to bring to your conversation in this conversation today? So I'll start with you, Bob.
Great question. I think one thing that people don't know about me is kind of my early career working with community organizers and how much that imprinted on me the importance of thinking about equity, working with communities, working with parents in both the technical aspects of education, but also the political aspects of education. I was talking to some friends here earlier today about back in the day in District 27 in New York, which, if you don't know it, is Bensonhurst and Far Rockaway. And you know, it wasn't long ago, 1993, that they finally had an African-American woman as superintendent. And when she got there, she actually, on her first day of work, somebody scratched an obscenity in the front of her car. And what she ended up doing, I was at a place called Advocates for Children at that point. What we ended up doing was supporting her and working with her to kind of rethink the board and how she operated. But the guts of that woman was extraordinary and remains an inspiration. She drove her car around with that obscenity for 3 weeks. She wasn't going to be intimidated by what was a white majority in that community school district. So those are really important experiences, and I think a lot of you have those experiences, and we're trying at the foundation to do what we do well, which is technical work and thinking about long-haul problems, but also just always remembering how complicated it is on the field, on the ground, and how important that ground game is to ultimately get to success for our young people.
Thanks. Pam?
Well, I think most people know that I was a practicing doctor for many years and working a lot with children. My specialty was children who had been exposed to trauma. But the main thing I think that I'd want you to know that I learned is that first, if you work directly with children and you're lucky enough to do that, they teach you everything that you need to know, all the stuff that is not in books. The other thing is that you witness firsthand that not only do children surmount adversities of all kinds, they are malleable to the experiences around them, a relationship, an environment, somebody who believes in them. So I witnessed unbelievable change and growth in children, and nothing will ever dissuade me about what's possible if we provide what they need.
Thanks. Jim?
I'm Jim Shelton. I think for me, the thing that has shown up a lot lately is the thing that brought me into education is the thing that I've continued to be propelled by. I had the opportunity to go to a different school than my neighborhood school. And so I remember very distinctly being in 3rd grade at my best friend's house, and his brother was in the 6th grade, and I thought he was the coolest, smartest person that I ever knew. And in that moment, I wound up helping him with his homework. And my immediate reaction was, something is wrong if he doesn't know how to do what he should know at 6th grade, and it has nothing to do with him. It has nothing to do with him. And what I feel like is, for the bulk of, like, a whole lot of time now, is my work has been about getting us and our systems to recognize that all of the things that we project onto children and their circumstances about their inability to realize their potential is just a reflection of our own failures. And I just want us to sit with that and then get out of our seats and start running instead of walking. That's where I am today.
Thanks. So we're on the third of 3 days, and we've had great speakers and conversations. As you stand in this moment, what are your best hopes for what learning experiences could be for young people? How has the pandemic broadened our vision of what's possible? And I'll start with you, Pam.
You know, it's an incredible thing what a disruption like this does, because it makes you think about what are the things that are the essentials, the non-negotiables for kids in any learning setting. So one is that kids absolutely have to have a primary relationship that they can count on, that they trust. And that relationship is not just the emotional motivator in their life, it's actually a biologic one too. The other thing that we, I think, are seeing right now are the ways in which the environments that have been our educational settings have not worked for most kids. Just based on the fact that kids are individuals, their individuality is distinct, their potential is limitless. And one of the first principles of human development is that context, environments, relationships, and experiences drive development, not genes. So once we know that our job is to design context. As Jim said, it's not the kid. It's what we have provided around that child to unlock what's inside them.
Bob?
Well, you know, in part because of the two people next to me, one of the things we've been thinking a lot about is what constitutes an environment where students are motivated, engaged, and persist in any subject, but now in math. And that MEP, as we kind of call it, we have to have an acronym at the Gates Foundation, otherwise we're not doing our job, has really kind of emerged from investing in 39 different communities for the last 5 years in continuous improvement and work we're doing around 8th grade, 9th grade, and well-matched post-secondary on-track metrics. What we've seen, particularly in the pandemic, was how important the whole child and then those specific aspects of the child together with other aspects of children were in creating an environment where they could be successful as learners. And for us, it was exciting to learn from the leadership of our grantees who started to use things like PERTs, who started to think about what is the relationship between academics and belonging. How do we create a different environment for young people that takes into account their interests, their voice, their agency, and they were enacting that in a time of great turmoil, and now that's even more important. And so I hope that as we kind of go forward, we don't backslide and go to a place where we once were, where reform was really about a test, but rather to think about reform as a place where we create thriving environments for students. I'm stealing that from Pam. But where we really do create an environment where kids learn, they enjoy schooling, they persist in schooling, and they understand its value in their lives on their terms. Because if we can't do that, public education isn't going to make it, and there's enough understanding of that amongst parents and communities that is increasingly going to be a demand.
So I think it's important to remember that when we say like what we just went through, we got to remember that there were 3 crises that we faced as a country. There was the COVID, there's the racial reckoning, and there's the economic impact of it all. And when I say the economic impact of it all, the revelation that the inequities that we have been ignoring for a long time existed and have persisted and are getting worse. And they're not only getting worse, and sorry, you guys who have not been exposed to me will know that I am not Mr. Sunshine in the morning. But this is real, right? The reality is that what we have is a revelation of the inequity in a way that we have been unwilling to face. We've been unwilling to face the fact that the upward mobility in this country has been declining from a better chance of doing better than your parents of 90% if you were born in the 1940s to just 50-50 if you were born in the 1980s, right? That's for everybody. That's not just for black and brown kids, and for black and brown kids, we know what that looks like. So we have revealed a whole set of things through the pandemics that have forced a realization of the several things. One is that we can't have these conversations anymore without actually overlaying the lens of race. Like the ability to just genericize the answers has been stripped away. And people want to deny that, and we're going to fight about it, but the reality is there is no way to say that you're going to go after these problems without dealing with the issues of race that are embedded in them. And people who are serious about the work and who still rely on science, who still rely on rigor, even though they used to push those things to the side sometimes, now are recognizing they can't do that anymore. Number two, it has become apparent that the spread is real, right? So I used to do this, right when I left CZI, I did this thing to say, okay, so where I want to take my work. And it was called disruptive reconstruction, with the notion of building out disruptive innovation and the needs for something like a new reconstruction. And in that, one of the things that I highlighted was that the disparities, you guys may remember seeing this, that the disparities for what are called deaths of despair for white people have been increasing dramatically, right? And what is happening is that the things that were attributed to black and brown people as cultural maladies that came from the way we live our lives, when all of a sudden the economic downturn and other things have started to hit white communities, the opioid epidemic, you're seeing these same kinds of trends in the white community, leading even to the only race that has actually seen declines in lifespan, right? So the notion that this is just an isolated problem has also been stripped away. So what is the opportunity that this creates? Well, the opportunity that this creates is one to have real conversations, which is a hard political thing in this world, but real conversations about, so what are the solutions that are needed that actually address the real problems that come when people live in poverty and when mobility is in the way? The second is that, as Pam pointed out, it is actually context that matters, right? So all of a sudden, this conversation about genes, you know, that people like hid from, and then some people interjected with these crazy books every once in a while. Like, okay, it's clearly not about these differences in people anymore. It is about what we're doing for them and with them. That creates an opportunity for a different kind of problem solving than we've had before. And the third is we actually, even as bad as things got, learned a lot through the process of trying to educate our kids in this very different context and moment in time, where in fact we have recognized the intersection of your physical health and your mental health and your identity and your academic achievement and your social emotional learning in ways that we hadn't before. And if we can keep ourselves from running back to what we knew because it's familiar, there's an opportunity for us to extend that into a new future for teaching and learning. And that's where I think the opportunity is for us.
So I was going to start with you for this question, but you're all sunshine this morning, so I wasn't sure about doing it. So, but I'm still going to start. Learning loss. You know, the conversations around learning loss and that term is being used a lot, and it does feel as though that term and the mindset it creates is actually incentivizing us to, you know, high dosage tutoring, doing more of what we used to do before. So how do we make sense about those discussions of where kids are right now, where we go, what they need? Could we be more asset-based in terms of how we are talking about what kids need and therefore how we move forward?
Yeah. So one, I think that we have to anchor in two things. One is the language of potential for our young people, and the unrealized potential, but the unlimited potential, has to be the driving language of our work. And the question is, how are we unlocking the potential that is already in them as the work that we need to do, as opposed to fixing them? The second is recognizing that in order for them to have opportunity, that means that there are things that they have to be able to learn and be able to do, and that there are trajectories that work better than others, and that we failed them when we failed to provide them with the opportunities that actually work. Now, that sounds like at the 100,000-foot level, sounds like something no one could disagree with. But if you go down to, well, how do we actually operationalize this in the context of schools? Why don't we have more priority on, you know, Sharif's going to come up here. We have the data and evidence that talks about the importance of having teachers of color in the classroom. What is the investment that we're making in that so that that experience is different? We have the data that tells us about what it actually takes to alleviate the stress in order to create the environments where young kids can be successful. Why don't we pay more attention to the environmental context when we're doing this? So in some ways, this is the oldest story to tell, but it's the most important story to tell, which is why aren't we doing the things that we know work and then getting better prepared to accelerate the pace at which we're learning about the things that we don't know about how we support our kids well, given this more integrated view of what their needs are and what their possibilities are.
Bob, Pam?
One of the things that really, really makes me angry about the learning loss language, aside from the obvious that, can you imagine any child that would get better at anything if you were just telling them what they lost and all of this kind of gap in their learning? So first of all, in first rules of motivation, you would never do that logically. But the other thing is, in the schools that my organization, Turnaround for Children, worked in, all learning was gone when testing was going on. Okay, what happened in the schools is this tremendous emphasis on preparing kids to take a test. So what did we actually think was going to happen when kids have not been in school? So they aren't getting the test prep. Okay, did we really think that we weren't going to see changes in testing given the focus on testing? So it's this, can you really lose something that you hadn't learned in the first place? So this goes back to Jim's point about things that are getting unmasked. The other thing is that many schools deal with kids that have an injury, an accident, an operation, they're out of school for 6 months. Do they catch up? Yes. Schools, many schools know how to do this. So what's happening, and you can see the no good deed goes unpunished and unintended consequences, we're labeling it a gap and a deficit. There's this huge focus on so-called high-dose tutoring, not the holistic picture that Jim just painted. And what do we think is going to be happening with those tutors? Okay, they're going to be getting ready to take a test. And then that test may show that the scores in fact went up. So did more learning happen? This is the thing that really, really troubles me about how we're naming the problem and how that then drives a narrow solution and a wrong one, in my view.
Yeah, let's dwell on the unmasking for a moment, because I think that's really important to acknowledge. Has there been learning loss? Yes. But has there always been learning loss for some students? Absolutely. The system is structured in ways that fundamentally don't work for young people, and frankly don't work for the adults who work for them either. And if we wanted to create a set of experiences that would alienate young people from math or alienate them from learning, we've done a really good job of that. And so the learning loss question can be one where we take high dosage tutoring and try to optimize against an existing system that is not working for too many students and too many adults. Or we can start to think about the transformation of models, the new ideas that are necessary to create an enriched learning environment for every student. I mean, there are challenges that go well beyond the education system. Jim talked about the concentration of poverty. We've always had an enormous concentration of poverty. And have we created tools and systems that enable young people in those circumstances to thrive? Or do we just take what's worked for some and impose it on others and then blame them, not recognizing their assets, their motivation, and what the community brings to the table in the education process? We have an invitation, I think, at this moment for much greater transformation, much greater creativity in thinking about how schools both function as schools and intersect with broader social systems that are supposed to lift all people up, that are supposed to create economic mobility, and as important as economic mobility, deep citizenship and empathy towards one another. And we aren't building those systems right now. And that's my biggest fear, that the gravitational pull of habit, together with structures that are in place, will just push really well-meaning people back to what they know, rather than creating environments where they can explore something new and think about the transformation that the pandemic highlights we need to undertake. A transformation based on economics, a transformation based on racial segregation, a transformation based on what we actually ask young people to learn and do, and whether that's really relevant and empowering in their lives, and frankly lifting it up, whether it's relevant and empowering for our society. So I hope, but I fear that people who've worked so hard the last 3 years, who are so exhausted by trying to kind of rebuild schools, aren't going to have that energy to kind of reimagine based on what we know and what has been unmasked. So I think that's a collective challenge for all of us. We need to bring energy to the people who are going to help create that system. And that's got to be a fundamental goal for all of us.
So Bob, I hear there was some news from Gates this week. I mean, I'm not, but I want to, you alluded to this, so I want to follow up. So Temple Grandin has a new book out called Visual Thinking, and there's an article in The Atlantic called Against Algebra. So saying that makes this seem more pointed than it is, which it isn't. But she talks about how she uses algebra as an example of how, schools have kind of been very single-minded, very kind of in how we think about math. That's nothing like the math that people use in the real world. And she quotes Paul Lockhart, who wrote Mathematician's Lament, who wrote, "If I had to design a mechanism for the express purpose of destroying a child's natural curiosity and love of pattern making, I simply wouldn't have the imagination to come up with the kind of senseless, soul-crushing ideas that constitute contemporary mathematics education." And we had a great conversation during a deep dive panel on math about the need to modernize how we think about math today and what all kids need, as well as ensure equity to allow students in. So as you think about the new strategy in math that Gates has just unveiled, how are you going to be thinking about balancing the legitimate need for high standards and making sure all kids have the basics with the reality that young people are unique and their pathways are unique?
Maybe we should rethink that and do literacy instead, given those quotes. Look, I think the Grandin book really underscores a couple of things that I think are really important and that I am super excited about in the strategy. I can't underscore all the reasons why I think it's helpful for us to go deeper in this subject, for the foundation to go deeper, but for all of you to continue to do what you're doing, and then for us to partner and think in different ways together. Math is unique. It has a right answer. It has a learning progression in how we learn and master concepts, but some of that learning progression and some of those concepts are very old. The math pathways that we see in middle school and high school were announced at the end of the 19th century. That's been there for a long time. And the math we see in schools typically is derived from about 1935, 1937. So there's a lot we can do to think about math and still be true to math as a really important skill in the vocational world. So in the Grandin book, what I love about it is there is a right answer in math. We're committed to enable kids to have the procedural and conceptual skills to get to the right answer. Let's be clear. But there are multiple paths that you can use to get to the top of that mountain and get that answer. There are visual learners. There's a variety of different pedagogies that I think are very powerful and enable young people to learn. But there's also the need to get the math right. So while we're excited about building, with illustrative math, with a variety of other folks who are doing math, there are ways we can change the pedagogy. There are ways we can rethink delivery that make it relevant to students, that enables them to persist in that zone approximate struggle, and ultimately enables them to see the relevance of what we're trying to do. If we were just focused on the procedural aspects of math, I would be very disappointed with our strategy and what we were proposing to do. What we're trying to think about is how do you build the fluency in early level math, to build the conceptual knowledge in mid-level math, to apply it to different disciplines and opportunities as students age and progress in their skills and fluidity. And so we're going to be focusing, I'll just do the quick wrap, and happy to talk to anybody afterwards. We've got a couple of big buckets that we're going to be focusing on for 10 years. One is just really getting the tools right? When you talk to teachers, they're overwhelmingly disappointed with commercial curriculum and the way it plays out. They're spending enormous amounts of personal time modifying that curriculum to meet the needs of the students in front of them. We need to do better in the tools and materials we give to teachers. And I think there are glimmers of digital tools that enable students to gain a deeper sense of relevance and equip teachers to be much more active and proactive in the classroom against what they do. To Pam's point, be a meaningful adult in that student's life. So we're going to be looking at technology, but I just really want to underscore how important teaching and teachers are to this overall vision of what we think a good math classroom looks like. Second thing we're going to be doing is really building the professional capacity and learning of teachers with the tools we're working in and investing in, and really talk to them about what that may look like and how we modify it. Again, teachers overwhelmingly report that in a typical district professional development session, they want to kind of take number 2 pencils, just go, it's unbearable. I've sat through many of them back in the day when I used to walk schools. We can do better in equipping teachers to be curious, giving teachers the skills necessary to be successful. Third thing we're going to really be thinking about is math pathways. Really thinking hard about what are the progressions and pathways, both in the early years and then later in high school. And finally, one of the things I'm really excited about is we've reserved 10% of our budget to start to think about innovation. What should math look like 15 years out? Where is the world going? What do we need to do pedagogically to think about a different kind of math experience for students? And what we're tentatively thinking, and if you agree with anything I've said, don't email me. But if you disagree, I want to hear immediately from you as quickly as possible so we can make some new mistakes. But we're really interested in thinking about unscheduled time, summer schools, electives. How do we use that time to really go beyond assessment, as Pam was talking about, to really think about new ways of creating pedagogic opportunities for teachers and the students themselves. A school I love is Beam. It's a summer program in New York. You go there, it's focused on kids of color. They start in 6th grade, they go through 12th grade. It's pandemonium, but those kids are becoming expert in math and they are loving every single minute they're in the program. We can create that across the country with staff because I think they have that aspiration too, so we need to build up. I am done with preaching. Happy to give you more information later.
I want to pick up on something you said about technology. So Jim, technology is a tool and it can be used to make more traditional approaches to education more efficient, or it can be used to expand, right, how we think about where learning happens, how, with whom. What do you see as some of the most, a compelling example of where technology is being integrated into learning environments and experiences, and where would you push folks who are investing in ed tech to dream bigger or differently?
So I'm going to answer a different question.
Okay. Is Zen.
Yeah, because one, I realized I didn't really answer your last question, and I also see that we got like a few minutes left.
Yeah, that's great.
And some of the things that have been said have been so profound. I think technology has got the opportunity to help us really transform the landscape for young people. We saw, and we've seen before, the way it provides access. We know it has the potential to actually have much deeper insight because when you're using technology, you not only get to see the outcome, but if you do it right, you can see the process of learning. So we can learn a lot more about how each individual student is succeeding, struggling, and then frankly, in macro, really start to understand what the process of learning looks like in very different ways. We can actually really reshape the way we think about how time is structured so that teachers can do the things that are most precious, that only teachers can do. And then we can use the technology to help us to support students to do the things that they frankly can drive for themselves or with their peers or in other environments. So I think all of those things are showing up, and we see examples of those. I won't try and call any in particular out. But the thing that we've not talked about is something that Bob mentioned and is reflected in the other part is what we are most at risk at and people taking as a lesson from our time right now is using all of these different specific tools to try and solve the problem for right now. And one of the things that we said is, the reality is that the problems that we have created are not going to get solved in the next 3 years. There's not an acceleration program to solve the problems that we've created. So the question for us is, how do we actually revamp the entire system in a way that solves the problem that we knew we had from the beginning? And there are 3 things that we haven't talked about. One is, how do we bring purpose into school? The biggest problem that we've had, in my humble opinion, is there are very few schools that I walk into where most of the kids wouldn't describe it largely as boring. And where a predominant question is not, why am I doing this? What am I going to use this for? And we have yet to solve that problem. And technology, I will come back to this, like the opportunity for exposure in ways that are compelling to really real reasons to learn. Like with technology, we should just be exposing kids to, there's no reason they shouldn't be able to see the entire world given the technology that is at our fingertips, let alone what we can develop in very short order. The same thing with learning environments that actually matter. So I want to I'll stop there, and I'll talk about the ways in which we can bring together different environments to actually use technology to light the fire that unlocks that potential. But I just don't want us to like start shooting for tools when in fact there's something actually different that needs to happen and the tools need to support it.
That's great. I mean, I have many more questions, but we are coming to the end of our time. So we're hearing from many families, many students in a way that's concerning, that they really don't believe our public education system can give them what they want. And they are leaving. Micro schools, learning hubs, all sorts of things. So public education feels like it's at a moment of great risk because when that many people leave, the system collapses. And I would posit, I was going to ask you, but I'll posit that you can't have equity without a public education system. And a lot of the investments are what you all have been talking about, which is infrastructures and systems and different ways of doing things. So if you were going for the 20-year play here, because we're not going to transform the system in two, long-term strategic investments that let public education be more adaptive and responsive, where would you put your dollars? And Pam, I'll start with you.
So if I was thinking in a time frame of 20 years, the thing that I would tackle first is defining the purpose or redefining the purpose of education and redefining it with a powerful narrative that takes into account what we know. And that is that our young people are distinct as individuals, they are loaded with potential, and that if our priorities are to provide the environments, experiences, and relationships that nurture their growth so that their agency is activated, that is a developmental bet, and that can't happen in a short time frame. We have to remove impediments, and one of the biggest by far is how we measure. We don't measure the right things, we don't measure context, and yet we say context is the primary driver of change. We keep measuring the fish, we never measure the lake. So removing impediments to the kinds of ability to use what we know, which was what Jim was talking about, is the other place that I'd focus.
Bob?
I think, we're making a big bet on math, 10 years, not 20, but we'll see. The thing that I'm excited about is I think the foundation's really serious about sticking this out for the long term and continuing to work on this problem until we figure out ways to be effective with you and the field around achievement. But I also think that there is a reality that we're confronting where we really need to recognize that some of that implosion has already occurred. Like when I look at the New York City public school system, it is 73% students of color, 80% of the students of color in New York State. And it is the vast majority of kids who can have already left. So that is sad. The mythic diverse public system has not existed in New York City for 25 years. We may be unique because it's a segregated system in many ways. But I also think that the people we have are really the people we're blessed to have, so we need to figure out what we're doing with those people in ways that transform the system. And I do believe that we need as a group a different kind of rhetoric in how we talk about public education. We need to move from generality to specifics. We need to acknowledge context with facts about what is in that context, and we need to build our own professional knowledge and the professional knowledge of teachers around very specific challenges embedded in this broader sense of purpose and values. So we can talk about professional learning, but are we talking about professional learning for pre-K through second grade? Because that's very different from professional learning for high school. Are we talking about curriculum that is on the shelf that reifies sitting in lines? Or are we talking about a much more creative curriculum that enables young people to discover and learn concepts and master the procedural skills? So I think I answered in about 8 different ways, but the big bet for us is math.
Oh, yes, thank you. Jim, I'm going to give you the final word on this.
Sure. So, I mean, we talked about a lot of these things already, but the good news for me is I tried, but I failed at this big bet. One, we talked about needing to better define what it means to actually unlock the full potential of a young person and recognize the linkages between their mental health, their physical health, their identity, their social emotional health, development, and their academic and other cognitive skills. And then, as Pam said, be able to link that to measures of how that plays out in different contexts so you can support their growth and development. Not evaluative, growth and development. The second is, we don't actually have the infrastructure to actually do that research and learning. And the way you do that is a connection between the researchers and the practitioners in real environments where you actually have the instrumentation to be able to see what's happening in context at scale, and then from that large amount of insight, then actually start to figure out what works for whom in what context, which we've consistently struggled with. But finally, that's another thing that technology can allow us to do. We can see things at a scale that we never could see before. Still recognizing it's still about the interactions at that individual human level. And then the third thing becomes, well, then how do you translate that all into the tools, the resources, the strategies that lots of people can do so you can actually take this to scale and make it broadly accessible to everyone? And recognize that the connections between what we consider our learning systems, our school systems, education systems, higher ed systems, and training systems in the workforce need to be linked to our other systems so that they don't have to bear the full burden. And so how do you create the tools and resources that our educators, as we call them, need, but also how do you actually create the plugins, if you will, from the health system, the mental health system, the employment systems, so that the work of school becomes very different and can leverage lots of other resources. That's my 20-year bet.
And I think, one thing I'm hearing what all of you said is this is so big. It is beyond the capabilities of one foundation, one funder. And so as a network of grant makers, what does that mean, right, for us as we leave here, think about kind of how we move forward. So thank you all so much for your time and your insights. Please join me in giving them a round of applause. So I'm very excited to introduce our final panel of this year's conference. We're going to hear from 4 Black leaders and educators who are going to share the dreams that they hold for the future and the essential role that philanthropy must play in making that vision a reality. It's going to be moderated by Liz Thompson, who will come up. But first, I'll invite Sharif El-Mekki, is the CEO of the Center for Black Educator Development, which he founded to create a national pipeline to attract, develop, support, and empower Black teachers to help Black children liberate themselves, their families, and ultimately society. Saamra Mekuria-Grillo is the CEO and co-founder of Formation Ventures, a nonprofit that's dedicated to accelerating emerging Black entrepreneurs ages 16 through 26 through educational and new venture support programs. And Jamyle Cannon, who's the founder and executive director of The Block, a sports-based education nonprofit using the sport of boxing to provide academic and social resources to Chicago's youth. And the panel, as I said, is going to be moderated by Liz Thompson, who's president of the Cleveland Avenue Foundation for Education Group, the CAFE Group, and founder of the 1954 Project. Please join me in welcoming them.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you all for that introduction. I don't think I even need that. There we go. So thank you for joining us for this last session of the conference. I want to especially thank Celine and my guy Kyle and the entire team at Grantmakers for producing such an awesome event this week with tons of real-world examples of how to improve our work. Thank you all. Thanks to everyone who stopped by our reception last night. We had a great time. There was so much love and community in the room. How many of you were able to stop by last night? Yes, thank you all. We had a great time. That macaroni bar was on fire, so thank you all. And speaking of food, I want to give a special shout out to our entire hospitality team that's helping us this morning.
We got Jonathan, Alfredo, 5 a.m. and 5 p.m. and that was our bartender last night. They've just been incredibly helpful to us and to our tech folks in the back, who the whole conference would sound like this if it wasn't for them. So thank you all so much. We don't take you for granted. So I thought a lot about what to say to kind of summarize what I've picked up through this week of sessions. This is my first conference with Grantmakers, so I was very excited. At first I thought about, let me start with all the stats that go on about how few philanthropic dollars go to organizations run by people of color. But then I realized, y'all know that already. So then I was looking at the slides that I was going to prepare that show how many dollars that were committed to organizations run by people of color in the aftermath of the summer of 2020, but then how few of those dollars have actually shown up. But y'all already know that. Plan C. Many of those same organizations that pledged those dollars really sought out Black leaders to gain a deeper understanding of what was happening around them. I actually had a friend call me and say, Liz, just tell me what to do. It was genuine. It was heartfelt. I was really hoping that I would meet more philanthropists here this week. Again, this is my first conference. I thought there would be more philanthropists like me really wanting to learn how to do the work in a way that made it better. I was surprised that there weren't that many that I was, looking forward to meeting. So let me share with you a few of my thoughts based on what I did observe. I have learned a lot this week, and I'm super glad that I came. Everything from why students experience the antiquated math curriculum that we just heard about. Thank you, Adrian Mims and Frank, for teaching me about that. Ways to better leverage capacity building organizations to further our own work. Thank you, Leona, for teaching me about that. The importance of the process of honoring each other, deeply honoring each other. Thank you, Swil Kaneem, who taught me that in his culture, honor is the pipeline that love flows through. A common theme throughout the sessions that I've attended is how directly proportional the value of the information is to the proximity of the people sharing that information. Those math people that I learned from, they were PhDs. I trust them. I learned from a very wise soul who taught me that philanthropy can be extroverted and introverted, and sometimes it hides behind a firewall of protection. I trust him when he says that. I heard from a veteran nonprofit leader who told me last night, the most important thing you can do, Liz, is to see your grantees. I trust her when she said that. What's so clear to me is that every turn, there can be no substitute for the lived experience, or even experiences that are passed down from one generation to the next. And so today we want to explore proximity. What does it mean? Why does it matter? We use that word a lot in our education and racial equity circles, but what do we mean when we say proximate leaders? One of my favorite quotes is by Frederick Douglass, and it goes, "Some know the value of education by having it. I knew its value by not having it." And so I want to use that quote as a springboard for why I'm even standing here with you today. My husband and I started our family foundation, the Cleveland Avenue Foundation for Education, back in 2014, with the same desire as everyone that starts a foundation. We wanted to have impact. So we endowed 7 scholarships at Purdue in their minority engineering program. We have an internship program that introduces students to career options in philanthropy, and we support amazing Black leaders in education. But we started the work by providing financial support to organizations in Chicago in the college access and success space. But what we discovered over time was that there were gaps in the work that we were funding. And we became more and more restless as we continued to see those gaps unfilled. One of those gaps was the lack of transformational funding for Black leaders overall, and especially for those in the education space. I had been an executive director of 2 different nonprofits after 10 years in the corporate space. I helped bring City Year to Chicago back in the 90s, and I ran a Family Star early Montessori Head Start school. I remembered how difficult it had been for me to raise money for those endeavors. I remembered how difficult it was to do the work without a community of support of my peers. That was 25 years ago. But I wondered why, 25 years later, I still didn't see those supports in place in the way that I thought they might be. Well, now, of course, there are several initiatives now that support Black leaders. We've got EdLock here, who I'm proud to see the work that they do. We have New Profit that's supporting the work of Black leaders. But back when my husband and I started this, these things didn't exist in their current forms. And so we began planning to launch what we would eventually call the 1954 Project. We named it that in recognition of the thousands of jobs that were lost by Black educators in the wake of the 1954 Supreme Court decision. And while there's a deep reservoir of talent that exists in our communities today, we've never fully recovered from that loss of intellectual capital that existed in the classroom. So my husband and I applied our own resources to this challenge as we saw it. But our connection to the challenge is different. I grew up in Cabrini Green in Chicago on Cleveland Avenue, 4 blocks away from this little dude who would become my husband on the same street. We are those students that we're trying to help. We are those professionals that we're trying to support. I've lived the experience of the students that Jamyle works with every day. I've experienced Sharif's journey as a nonprofit leader. I know Saamra's challenges as a Black woman leading a nonprofit organization. So when my husband and I apply our own resources to these challenges, it looks different. My journey with the leaders that I support is different. When we welcomed 20 of them to Chicago last week for our first full 1954 Project Network Summit, it was different. From the house music that the live DJ played when they came in, to the closing circle when the power of our ancestors was called upon to erase all doubt of why we were called to do this work. It's a different connection, and one that provides shortcuts where I don't need a PowerPoint. The time that these leaders might normally spend explaining their work can be spent on ideation, because I already know. Not because of what I've read, but because of what I've lived. And that is the power of proximity. And while the desire of philanthropy, in most cases, wants the same outcome as we want, the closeness, the connection that I have to the work, it's different. Our work is informed by our personal experience, navigating from our respective apartments on Cleveland Avenue to navigating the School of Engineering at Purdue as 2 young Black kids from the hood, through becoming CEO of one of the largest corporations on the planet, to building out a new segment within philanthropy today. Our connection and our lived experiences are critical to the impact we're trying to have. We have directly benefited from the economic mobility of a good education. Education is incredibly personal for us. We are committed to passing down the legacy of the importance of education and investing in these Black leaders who advocate for the voices and the stories we as funders have yet to hear. And it's not that our work is any more important than anyone else's, but it's different. And we need more people at the table with our lived experiences to inform how we all do the work. As funders, we must understand and value the unique perspectives and the experience of the people closest to the issues. We must respect and include these voices because to have the greatest impact, we need many different life experiences on our teams. Everyone's experience is valuable, but we also must recognize that some voices have been overlooked and some voices have not had a seat at the table. And despite all that we endured, I'm hopeful. When I look at the diversity in the room today, and when we have a chance to genuinely connect, like so many of us did last night, I'm hopeful. We're all here because we have a common interest. We're committed to funding education and hopefully centering on the voices of those closest to the work. Because we know we will never have the impact we seek until we truly value the lived experiences. So let's start our conversation. Hey, good people.
Good morning.
Good morning. All right, so we're talking about proximity this morning. I would love for each of you all to talk to us about an example of where a lived experience you had such a positive impact on the work that you do.
I wouldn't be doing this work had it not been for my lived experience. I distinctly remember being a young person and moving from one school that was really well resourced to a school that was in a poor neighborhood. I remember being held to such a high standard at this previous school. I'm in second grade, and the spelling words that I remember most distinctly were phenomenal and unique. Like, I'm 7 years old and I'm spelling phenomenal and unique. My uncle can't spell these words. I'm the man, I got it. And we moved to this school that was surrounded by other poor neighborhoods, and I walk in the middle of the school year, and on the first day, my first day at this new school, kids are sitting down on the carpet, the teacher's at the easel, they're in a spelling lesson. I'm like, it's my time, let's go. And I hear the teacher sounding out the words together and because, and thinking, this is different. This isn't what I came from. I look at the room, and there are a lot more black and brown kids in this room, and they brought me the paper we're supposed to write on, and it was the training paper with the dotted lines that go down the middle. And I just thought, they think we're stupid. And I cried on my first day at this new school because I didn't understand what was happening, but I knew that it was unfair, and I knew it was going to keep happening, and it brought up a lot of anger in me. And I took it out. I was fighting a lot. I was suspended from school. I was arrested by the time I was a preteen. I had court-ordered anger management. None of those things changed my life. But having a coach who really believed in me and loved me, and having my mother graduate college, those two things together, put me on a completely different path, to the point where I realized that was the impact that I wanted to make on other people as well. For these kids who are looking for a fight, for these kids who have that anger in them and have a real reason to be mad, I needed to find a way to harness that energy just like my energy was harnessed, and help them fight for success and push to their full potential in their lives.
And you do that at the block.
Do that at the block. We look for kids who want to fight by using the sport of boxing to bring them in so that we can empower them with academic resources, opportunities. You come to me, you want to fight. I'm taking you on a college trip. We're getting some math tutoring. We're learning computer science and robotics. We want to not tell you to change who you are before you engage with us. We want to embrace you so that we can help you to your full potential. Every kid who comes to our program graduates high school, gets accepted into college. That's been since 2016.
Appreciate you, sir, and the work you do.
Thank
Saamra?
So we work with Black young people to accelerate their entrepreneurial journeys, and it really comes from, for me, I was a kid with a lot of ideas, and I thought to myself, I looked around and I said, what am I going to do with these ideas? And I didn't see people like me starting companies, starting businesses, starting nonprofits. It wasn't until I was on the founding team at Pahara and I had a chance to see how Pahara Fellows were leveraging their relationships with their co-fellows to be able to go build the ideas that they had, that I said, oh, people are using these networks to figure out how to do things. Okay. And for me, seeing people like Ami Eubanks Davis, who I know is one of the 1954 luminaries,
yes.
And Michelle Ashton, they came into this program, and through the support that they felt there, they were able to go launch their visions for what needed to happen in the world. And it taught me about how networks and relationships are so critical, and gave me the confidence to say, oh, okay, maybe I can go do this too. So that's where it
We're
came
glad
from.
you did, Saamra.
Thank you.
Sharif?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the Center for Black Educator Development, and we're looking to rebuild the Black teacher pipeline, I can't help but to think of the arc of my lived experiences as well as those, my teammates and colleagues in the organization. Starting from my childhood experience in a pre-K to sixth grade school that many people in this room would look at as deficient because it was segregated. We looked at it as a heavenly experience at Nitham Musasa. Moving on to being a 20-year-old college graduate, being shot by a 19-year-old seventh grade dropout. And then transitioning and being recruited to teach by a veteran black male educator in the school district of Philadelphia, Dr. Martin Ryder, and being taught how to teach by Yvonne Savior, one of the few black women who was awarded Pennsylvania's Teacher of the Year. And so when I look at this culmination of Black teacher pipeline and what led me through, what challenged me when Derek saw, because of his illiteracy, his school experience, his rage was different than my rage. My rage was directed toward a system that was failing so many students that looked like me and how to address it. His rage was less disciplined, less focused, and just outward towards everybody, including himself. So for me, that collective lived experiences of not just me, but my colleagues is what drives us and helps and informs what we're trying to do today and how we connect with the youth who we're saying have to solve the issues of tomorrow.
Sharif, you mentioned something at the table this morning. You talked about how teachers in the past, black teachers in particular, have been so well versed in so many things that we're studying today. The socio-emotional learning and all of the tips and tricks that we have done years and years of research on, that black teachers have been doing this for generations. And I just think about the 38,000 teachers that we lost as a result of Brown versus Board of Education. What would our schools look like today had we not lost them? That's a rhetorical question. If we have time, I'm coming back to you for that as an actual question. I want you all to now, as we think about leveraging those lived experiences, there's another part of that, and that is the social capital that we have as a result. A lot of time, the social capital that we gain through our lived experience is beneficial for the work that we do, but not necessarily able to be leveraged in order to advance it in terms of raising money or in terms of making connections. Talk to us about the importance of social capital in achieving your vision. And Saamra, I'll start with you.
For an entrepreneur, social capital is everything. Whether it is the people that you go to for support, the money that you raise, the networks that you have, that is the foundation. And that's why we see entrepreneurial hubs around the country, around the world. It's because those networks are what make it possible for people to start new things. I think about my own experience. I'm not on this stage without a strong network of people. Sharonda Bossier from Edlock, Celine Coggins, Christina Heights is a Pahara Fellow. She's our fiscal sponsor and a huge partner of ours. There's just, it's everywhere. It's a web that I see everywhere. And so when we think about what that means for the work that we do with young people, social capital is embedded throughout how we think about accelerating entrepreneurial journeys. We work with young people and provide them with near-peer mentorship, which is one of the most effective ways of developing social capital for young people. We talk to them about what it means to, we show them what it means to affirm their identities and think about who are the people that they can connect with to actually start to understand, deepen their understanding of the problem that they want to solve. So it's everywhere, throughout our work.
Sharif?
Yeah, social capital is such an interesting, kind of framework to think about, and it's so important. My first 26 years as a professional was all inside of a school. And so that's one example of social capital, but guess what? They're just as broke as I am, right? And so that's very different. And I would say on the flip side of that, being able to have the Principal Ambassador Fellowship at the U.S. Department of Ed during a time when Jim Shelton, Arnie Duncan, John King, Kalila Harris, David John, like all of these people were there. And I had a capstone project that was about this idea that was formulated, like, how do you support black men in education?
Yeah.
Well, I can talk to Jim Shelton, I can talk to Tara Bariani, I can talk to Arnie Duncan, John King, like I can talk to these folks in that space to really help refine and sharpen this. And I had no idea, this was 2011.
Oh, wow.
And so a decade later, it's really coming to fruition, but the social capital and was really about refining, pushing, challenging, but also being able to see at a macro level, oh, this isn't just a Philadelphia issue. This spans from Philly to Pasadena, right?
Yeah.
This is a particularly unique challenge, and that social capital allowed me to think and ideate and really develop, okay, here's what we believe can support rebuilding a black teacher pipeline.
Thanks, Sharif. Jamyle?
I want to put it pretty frankly. I struggled in this aspect of social capital because I had this program that we were working with where kids were walking from all over the west side of Chicago to be a part of it. We were having magnificent academic results. Kids in the program were ending the school year with an average GPA of a 3.2. And they wanted to be there. And I could not get funding until I met a rich white man. And once that happened, he then opened up his broader network, and I was talking to executive directors of foundations and other wealthy people who could then fund this organization. But I couldn't get funding based on the strength of the program alone, based on the recommendation of the young people who were within this program and the demand that came from within that community. That funding had to come from outside of the community by attracting the attention of people who were completely unrelated to the work that we were doing. So the idea of proximity and being close to the work that I am doing is sometimes at odds with the idea of getting our work funded.
And the connector for that is being able to build your social capital.
Absolutely.
So that now this gentleman that is funding your work is closer, has more proximity to the work himself than he did before. One of the things that we're finding through our work at the 1954 Project is while we are thrilled to be able to write $1 million check to each of 5 luminaries that we select each year, sometimes it is as important for us to open up our Rolodexes, I realize that's dating me, open up our iPhones and all of that and saying, I know this person, therefore now you know this person. Sometimes that can be a harder thing for people to do than writing the check. And so, you know, I ask people to reflect all the time, how are you supporting your grantees beyond the check? How are you putting your own social capital on the line in order to help them build theirs? So back to the summer of 2020, a lot of things changed for a lot of people all over the world. What changed for your work as a result of the racial reckoning during that summer? Sharif, I'll start with you.
Listen, we had just started in 2019, so the first thing I was like, why the heck did I leave my school? You know what I mean? Like, I loved my school. I was not one of those principals that's ready to leave. I only left because I was restless. Like, what would it take to do this instead of doing it nights and weekends? So to see that, and I want to tell you, like, I usually in person, like, yo, I don't blink no matter what. In 2020, I blinked and blinked hard. Like, you know, do we shut down? Do I say, hey, can I come back to my school and, you know, be the assistant principal? They had already hired him, or like whatever. But I think it also reinforced for me listening to our youth. So we had already did 1 year, and it was in person. And we reached out to the youth like, hey, we're thinking about not doing it. You know, obviously, you know, couldn't be in person and so on and so forth. They're like, why can't we do it virtual? I was like, everywhere I'm hearing, y'all hate virtual learning. You're shutting the computer, you're not turning it on, you're like, oh, that's school. We'll do freedom schools. And it just really repositioned my orientation of like, hey, like, you know what, and I'm always like, listen to the youth, listen to the youth. And at that time, I balked and like, I don't know. I'm so glad we did it. We went from this small, you know, Philadelphia base to a national organization with a national footprint with employees living all over the country. But it allowed us to have access to youth who said all of our school experience should mirror what we're experiencing this summer. And so to have that feedback from parents, from students, from my own daughters who participated and said, oh yes, this is different. This is a unique experience. And I almost missed the opportunity to experience that, to go from Philadelphia to having 15 states represented in our Black teacher apprentices, as well as the first, second, and third graders who were being taught by these high school and college kids. I almost missed it because I was just wringing my hand and singing sad songs instead of listening to the youth. So I'm glad they challenged me on it.
I don't know, Sharif, sounds like to me you listen to those most proximate to the issues.
Listen, they didn't create these problems, but they definitely have solutions to the problems. Yeah.
Just saying. Jamyle?
I want to follow on that because, you know, there's this initial sense of fear with everything that's going on at the time during the pandemic, the murder of George Floyd, and I thought about packing it in for a while, and I was walking down the street and a woman who lives down the street from our facility says, hey, our store got looted, my son's laid off, I don't know what we're gonna do, how am I gonna get food? And we started a food pantry that weekend. We passed out 6,000 pounds of fresh produce to the community. The kids were telling us that they were not enjoying their time in virtual learning, and they didn't like doing it at home. They needed some support, so we built out a virtual learning lab within our space. So listening to the community was important to us as an organization, and I started hearing more from foundations about how they wanted to listen to community more, the commitments that they were making to the Black community specifically. So I'd never talked to more foundations in my life, and I gave a lot of pointed feedback about what could change within their systems, but I didn't see those changes actually come through in terms of personnel or criteria or any substantive change to the systems that they were using to evaluate and choose the programs that they funded. So ultimately what happened was a lot of Black labor was used to support the thinking processes of the foundations, but we need more effort to put forth on that foundation side to change the systems that are creating the results that they're coming up with right now.
Thank you, Jamyle. Saamra, what changed for you?
So in the summer of 2020, I had just had I had a 1-year-old, so I was sort of coming off of second child and was trying to figure out. I had been looking at the idea that became Formation Ventures for about a year, but I had been sort of sitting on my hands a little bit, and I wasn't sure exactly how I wanted to do it. And I just looked at what was going on, and I said, I can't not do this right now. I have to do this, and I have to do it fast, because if we don't change the dynamics of wealth in this country, entrepreneurship is the biggest driver of wealth in this country, then we will never change the dynamics of power, and this will continue to happen again and again and again. And I can't look my 2 little boys in the face and say I didn't do this now. So.
We saw a video of Saamra's 2 adorable little guys this morning wishing her well as she sat on this panel today. It was the most adorable thing you've ever seen. Yeah, it was adorable. One of the things that I said at the top of my comments was I was really excited to be at this conference because I was getting such tangible ideas and tools to take back with me in order to improve my practice in philanthropy. So I'm going to ask each of you, what is one step for the members in our audience to take as they leave today? But I'm going to ask you to reflect on it in 2 different buckets. Professionally, what's one step you'd like for them to take? And personally, what might you recommend they do to improve their practice? Jamyle, let's start with you.
I think it's important that we look critically, professionally, we look critically at the points at which our systems allow for discretion and what the impact of that discretion is, who is harmed by that discretion, who's helped by it. I think a good way to think about this, I think everybody here has been harmed by a system since they got to this conference, and that's the elevator. You walk into there's the same conversation. Every time you go up on the elevator, the same conversation's happening. Like there's the key thing, and I can't get this to work. So actually, but the thing about that is that impacts me differently than it impacts you in a way that you may not be thinking about. Because what happens at this point is it empowers one person to decide who goes up without their key. There's one person. So every time I step into one of these situations for the first time as a black man, I'm thinking like, is this about to be a viral video? Like, is somebody going to refuse to let me go up because of the way that I look, the way that I present myself here today? So it empowers one person in that situation. So we have a system that's meant for our safety that, one, isn't supporting our safety because it's not working correctly, and two, creates these moments of discretion that are going to impact people disproportionately. And every system, this isn't my quote, but every system is perfectly designed for the results that it gets. So when that viral video happens, we'll point a finger at that individual and we say, this person is bad, but the whole time, the system was bad to begin with. So, and if they ask me that question, they ask me about my stay, I'm gonna give that feedback and they're not gonna listen. It's not gonna happen. I'm gonna give that direct feedback and nothing's gonna change from it. So the piece of advice that I have for people is to evaluate the discretionary points within the systems that we have. Make the changes to those systems that are necessary to, one, either eliminate that discretion or to benefit the people who are being harmed by the discretion. Make the changes to the personnel that are going to be necessary in order to accomplish those things. And to do so with the people who are harmed most in mind.
Saamra?
I was reflecting, listening to the earlier part of this panel, just around how much I think we are all aligned on the potential of young people. And so I would just say that I have the same advice professionally and personally. Really, truly, deeply believe in the genius of young people and young Black people in particular. If you give them the tools to envision and build the future they want to see, they will lead us. Like, I am convinced that they have the answers.
Yep.
We just need to give them the space and the tools to be able to build it. And so think about what that means for your day-to-day. Are you listening to the voices of young Black people, truly listening? Are you giving them the space to share what they want, what they believe, what their vision is for their future, for all of our futures? Because, I mean, let's be real, like, we don't know how to solve these problems, right? So why aren't we going to the young people? And I mean, young people are incredible.
They are.
They are incredible. So I exhort us all to, like, let go of I've been doing this work for a long time and I'm old and I know the things. Like, just really listen and let their genius lead us to the solutions that we desperately need.
We were having a conversation at the table this morning about how different phrases mean different things to different people. And when we talk about listening and believing in the genius of young people, I'm so old, I didn't know half of what y'all were talking about this morning. So trust me, I'm listening to them. I'm listening to y'all, and y'all are listening to them. Sharif, what would you say to our audience?
Yeah, I would say, and I think it weaves both personal and professionally, and it also touches on what you spoke about earlier. This idea, like, I wish everyone would be a student. I just wish everyone would be a student. I think so many of the things that I see people, foundations, organizations, what they're chasing, what they claim they want, it's already captured in the Black teaching traditions for generations. The Black pedagogical framework, the Black historical lens, like, it's captured, and you're running around like, we need social emotional learning, we need relationships, we need, all of these things that Black teachers had already been doing that, but they were ignored, they were, marginalized. Dr. Jarvis Givens, in his book Fugitive Pedagogy, if you haven't read it, you need to read it. He talks about, like, how they had to hide real instruction to do fake instruction for, a white system, right? And when I think about not only our educators today, professors, the ecosystem, not only are they still using white and Eurocentric educational theories, behavior theories, any educator who's like, I went through a traditional program will tell you, oh yeah, what are you steeped in? What's your what's your ideological genealogy, your intellectual genealogy? Where do you trace it? Dewey, Horace Mann, B.F. Skinner, Piaget, folks who couldn't even imagine black, brown, indigenous people in these schools. But that feeds the narrative, the mindset, the framing, the orientation, the philosophy of how, and then people are steeped in that and then sent to teach black and brown indigenous folks. That makes no sense, but I would also posit that that's not just educators, that's the ecosystem.
Yeah.
And if people understood why were nonprofits created originally, like what's 1954 Project, what are they drawing from? When these black revolutionary folks were in living rooms talking about this is how we're going to channel our money.
Yeah.
This is how we're going to fund and undermine a system of oppression. This was done before people could get college degrees in nonprofit work. They were in the streets doing that. And I'm not saying that, you know, none of the work can happen in fancy hotels and we don't have to go into basements and church basements and in the woods. I'm not saying we have to return to that.
Meet me in the woods, Sharif.
Besides the elevator, this joint is pretty dope, you know what I'm saying? So, I'm not saying that, but let's not forget the orientation that the people who were trying to change things had. I think that part was lost, and I would just love for people to really seep in where did nonprofits start and why? The creation of 500 black schools in the midst of places that were trying to burn them down, right? Like that was the nonprofit work. What was the black teaching tradition that may have even been strained during the Middle Passage but not broken? Strained during Reconstruction but not broken. Strained during Jim Crow Reconstruction, shutting down schools, but not broken. And I think we can learn the same thing as those in nonprofits, those in foundations. What can we actually be a student of and apply it to today?
If you need to know what the 1954 Project is about, I think you just heard. Last question. My good friend, the timekeeper, has told me so. If I were to give you a magic wand and you could go into these organizations and change one thing that would make it easier for you as black leaders trying to have the impact you're trying to have, what would it be? Saamra?
So as I started working on what became Formation Ventures, I was talking to a lot of VC investors because I was like, you know, entrepreneurship, I'm going to go talk to these people who invest in entrepreneurs. And over again, they told me that the type of work I was trying to do with the type of young people that I wanted to serve didn't fit their pattern recognition. And I was like, what do you mean by pattern recognition? And they said, well, you know, we have a rubric that we use because we, you know, have to make these smart decisions. We see all these different, you know, hundreds of proposals. So we look for patterns and we invest based on the patterns that we've seen be successful. And I'm like, well, but then you look at the statistics, you know, 1.2% of VC funding is going to black folks and 4% of philanthropic funds, depending on, you know, what source you're using. I was like, if that's the pattern that you're using, then nothing is ever gonna change. And so I guess my magic wand would be, how can we actually shift what that pattern is based on? What are the signals that we're looking for, and how do you actually interrogate, am I using signals that are disrupting the system, or am I using signals that are reinforcing it? And if I could wave that magic wand, I would say, let's disrupt that system and change the pattern so that it's based on proximity. It's based on the insights that people who have deep lived experience with the people that the communities that they are working with, that those insights are valued, and that you're looking for a vision that isn't gonna look like the same pattern, but could actually help us to transcend.
Thank you, Saamra. Jamyle?
I think a lot of us understand the call to listen. I think it needs to go from listening to doing, and by starting that doing internally. Start by looking at the internal systems that we have that are stopping us from getting the results that we want to get. We saw a lot of organizations within philanthropy come out with a commitment to Black leadership, a commitment to the Black community, and there are so many unmet pledges in that realm that it doesn't even make sense for the commitment to have been made to begin with. And it's because we think it's a matter of will. We think it's a matter of like, if we just want to do better, we'll end up doing better, but really it's a matter of systems and personnel and criteria. So we need to take a look at the systems that we have in place. What are we looking for in organizations? What is the criteria? What parts of this criteria actually make a difference for the impact that we're really trying to make? And which parts of this criteria is just familiar to us and fits the pattern that we're looking for? I think it's going to be incredibly important to not send the same people out with the same criteria and the same set of rules and expect a different result. So really take a look at ourselves internally first before going out back into the world.
Thank you, Jamyle. Sharif?
Yeah, I would say what I hope is that people will listen to, learn from, and give to organizations like EdLock, organizations like 1954 Project. What I'm nervous about is that you may have heard Liz talk about like we were welcome with house music, and that some of y'all are going to try to pull that off. Don't do that. like, you know, because if I show up there, I'm going to be a little suspicious of you and like what you're doing and what you're trying to do. But when we talk about proximity, the community, but also the people who have a unfiltered conversation about the work, the impact, our lived experiences, right? And so, you know, we talk about like, it's not just our organizations, but also like the organizations that are supporting us directly and through the lived experiences. So what does it mean for 1954 Project to be fully funded and be able to support? It doesn't mean that you're like, all right, now we're not supporting the smaller nonprofits, but like that you have a giving strategy that directly impacts them as well as us, and looking at that as part of the collective, you know, and so thinking about that. I hope that you really think about transformational gifts. That as you've been here this week, that you're actually thinking about who are we going to support and fund, and how does this influence what our plan is? Because I swear, I was a principal for 16 years, teacher for 10, did a whole lot of changing and tweaking. I've never seen any group of people besides funders revisit their strategic giving plans. I'm like, y'all change every time the wind blows. Oh, we got to go back and change. Oh no, we're not doing it. I'm like, it's pretty. As an educator, I'm just like, what are y'all doing? Like, you know. So I would say, like, really think about that. Like, how do you create this long-term support impact, and understand everything's not microwavable. We look at the Black teacher pipeline as 12 years long. So if you show up like, what are you doing in 6 months? Oh, how many teachers are you going to produce? The teacher that we're producing is in the 10th grade in high school. And we're going to support them all the way through until they matriculate through college and in their first 4 years of teaching. And so having that long-term understanding, but if you only try to give and lead through Excel and PowerPoints and from a distance, you're not going to understand why that 10th grader wants to lead a classroom. What the intergenerational coaching and mentoring and teaching support means to them as a 10th grader teaching a first grader and being mentored by a college student and our staff. You're not going to get that if you're not in proximity. And so I would say, be a student, learn, and think transformational and long-term, not the instantaneous, constantly changing everything. That's not how deep change works. That's right.
So you all, I'm going to close us out today with giving recognition to an organization I hadn't heard of, but Celine and Company had the presence of mind to invite the Typewriter Rodeo folks. And if you didn't experience them, I'm going to suggest you do. Because I asked them, I walked up to their booth and they said, give us a topic. And I said, the Black leaders that I'm trying to support. And a few minutes later, this is what came out. This is a tribute to the Black leaders that we support. It's called You Are Our Future. They see you seeing them, And this seeing is how we all see what the future needs to be. Our vision of your vision is the vision of the world we envision for all. Your hope of this now is the hope of our new now, the hope we hold, the hope you bring, this brilliant vision we want to see for all. From you, our great hope imbued. And so with that, I would ask that you thank the panelists today.
Well, we wanted to begin and end with hope, and I think you all really did a really nice job with that, so thank you so much. All right. I just have a few thank yous and a short goodbye. This has been an amazing experience for me. I've run the organization through 5 conferences, but we haven't been together in 3 years. It has met all of my hopes and expectations for reconnection, and I believe it has for so many of you because that's what I heard for all 3 days. So thank you so much. I want to, I think I have some slides. Yes, okay. I always get worried I'm gonna forget these parts, so first I wanna thank our board of directors who was invaluable in this process. Thank you to all of them. Next, I want to thank our conference planning committee and invite those of you who would like to be on it next year to volunteer. We'd love to have you. Are they up? Yes, thank you. And then I want to give just a really heartfelt thanks to my team. This is by and large a team who has been with us through many virtual conferences. For many of us, this was the first conference in person. And so I just am really, really grateful for folks who have just figured it out on the fly. I'm a terrible details person, and we have just incredible people on the team who have just handled so many details, thousands and thousands a day. And I also want to thank Marty Balcom and the Balcom Group who helped us with event planning and are just like our integrated team members as well. All right, and then I want to share the exciting news that next year we'll be going to Atlanta for our annual conference. So we hope you'll join us there. And then lastly, I just want to say thank you. The elephant in the room through the whole conference has been my departure. And so I want to just say a couple of words about where I'm headed. And there's a real clear thread from what I've done here to what I'm doing next. So I'm setting out to democratize the meaning of legacy. So it can't just be those in the philanthropic community that get access to rooms like this and communities like this to make sense of their role in the future of society and the future obligations we have to young people. And so I'm out to build that community for others. And if you want to learn more, take a look at legacyyears.org or the Legacy Years Project on LinkedIn, where I'm starting to I started as a hobby building this community, and I'm going to kind of move full-time into that. In a couple of months, I'll be part-time at Grantmakers for Education for the next couple of months, so I'll be able to interact with all of you that way. So thank you so much for your support, and thank you so much for being here. Well,